This series for Avodah is about people's own Torah. And my Torah is the Torah of social justice. But I want to make it clear that I believe that the Torah of social justice is an essential part of Judaism. You know, the sages debated which is more important, study or action. And the room was full of sages who thought it would be fine to just study books all day, and a few people who thought it would be better to get out there and do something. The conclusion was that study is more important because it leads to action. So that's my first premise is, if you want to be a good Jew, you have to be doing things in the world for yourself and for others that move toward making social change, that move toward creating a greater degree of justice and equity. I've done a great deal personally of service in my life and a great deal of helping young Jews find ways and places to do service in their own communities and far from their own communities in the rest of the world. But for me, and I hope for the people that I engaged in service programs, service is only half of the equation. The other half of the equation is advocacy. So what do I mean by that? If you provide service, you are making a huge difference to the person that you're helping. You are almost invariably making a huge difference for yourself. You are learning something about yourself. You are learning something about other people that you might not have known. You are discovering just how resilient people in need are and just how much they know about their own futures. But I hope that there's something else that you learn when you go out to do service. And that is, quite bluntly and quite frankly, that there are things that matter with the world. That there are people who should have enough to eat in our cities, in our states, in our country, elsewhere in the world, but they don't. That there are children who are dying, literally, in Flint, Michigan, because the water is poisoned. That there are places around the world where agricultural land is being stolen from families. So, you know, I quoted some text before. I'm probably going to quote some other text before I'm done. But if you asked me for the most important word of text, it wouldn't be civic, which means justice. It would be why. Because when you are out there in the world living, and when you are out there in the world doing service, and I want to say, and remember I've done service, feeling quite proud of yourself. When you are out there demonstrating, feeling very proud of yourself. Ask your question, why? Say, why is it that the water here is of poor quality? Why is it that the families in New York City who do the essential work during the pandemic, who are people of color, turn out not only not to have enough food benefits to feed their families, but turn out in many, many, many instances to be part of the group that we're now calling excluded workers, which means they don't get any federal benefit during the pandemic that most other Americans got. So again, the question over and over again is, why are these things the way they are? And then, of course, the critical question, what is it that I can do about them? And so for me, service, as miraculous and fantastic as it can be, will never be enough. It's why are things the way they are? Why is it that these children need extra help that they're not getting in school? Why is it that in, I think it's now 7 countries in the world, LGBT people are still put to death? And what has to happen to make systemic change? How do we undo 400 years of racism in this country? And you know what? I have a big surprise for you. Not really. It's not nearly as easy as making chicken soup. It's not nearly as easy as delivering food baskets. It's not even as easy as tutoring a child 1 hour a week for a year, and that's not easy. It requires, again, going back to study to understand, how did things get the way they are? And what is it that I can do about them? And when Judaism teaches us to pursue justice, I think that's what it means. It doesn't teach us, it could teach us, create a little kindness. It says that. It could say, be of service to others, particularly those in need. It says that. But it goes on to say, pursue justice. In fact, it says, justice shall you pursue. And the sages taught that it says justice twice because justice has to be not only the end that you're going toward, but the means you're using to get there. And so for me, again, going out and demonstrating for women's rights, going out there and demanding that the legislature enact tighter controls on guns, spectacular steps in the advocacy system. But I'm looking for people, for Jews, who take seriously the mandate never to stand idly by. Look at what's going on. Ask that question why. Ask what role each of us has in doing the long-term slog that will try to make our state, city, nation, and the world a place that is more just and more equitable. And if I had to put a little bit of a fillip on this right now for this year, 2020, I would say to young people particularly, a good place to start is with the elections. This is, you can take it from me, I'm as old as a dinosaur, the most critical election in the history of the United States. And at the Senate level, at the congressional level, at the local and state levels, and certainly at the White House, it's time for everyone to be engaged. Now, how you choose to be engaged, you can work for a campaign, you can make endless phone calls, you can write postcards. If we're allowed out of our homes, you can go and do some door-to-door canvassing. But I'm going to start by saying the most important thing is make a commitment right now to yourself that you will vote in this election, that you will inform yourself before you vote, and that you will find 5 other people who might not have voted or might not yet have thought through how they want to vote to protect the democracy in which we live, and see if you can convince them to vote for change that will protect the future of this country. Because the systems change that I'm talking about, the undoing of structural racism, that try to make the world a little more fairer, is not going to happen with the people who are currently in power. It's going to require us changing the people in power, and then it's going to require us continuing to pressure them to do what we want them to do. So for me, part of the social justice story that is so beautiful in Judaism is the mandate not to stand idly by, to do what we can to take care of those in great need, regardless of who they are, to respect them and do that work, treating them with dignity and with humility, but working all the time not to only help this individual or that family or that community, but to make systemic change that creates a greater amount of equity and justice in the world. I'm going to quote Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, whom I consider my professional mentor. I was privileged to know him as a child. First of all, a quote that many people are familiar with, very applicable to what I'm talking about. Rabbi Heschel said, "In a free society where terrible wrongs exist, some are guilty, but all are responsible." So none of you watching this video made a decision to cut SNAP benefits, made a decision 60 years ago to see that the GI Bill did not pertain to soldiers, returning soldiers of color. None of you is directly responsible for creating these inequities, but every single one of us has a responsibility to work to undo the inequities and make positive change. Just before Rabbi Heschel died, he did an interview on national television, and at the end of that interview, he was asked what advice he had for young people. I'm paraphrasing, but he said, "Let them be sure that every deed counts, that every word matters, but mostly let them remember to build their lives as if they were works of art." So build your life as if it was a work of art. Put out the energy you have to understand yourself better. Put out the energy you summon up to be of service to another. Put out the energy that you have to work side by side with that other, not to patronize them, but to be sure you understand what their life is like and how they want you to help. And then summon up an additional amount of energy and commit yourself to work, sometimes in the streets, sometimes in the halls of Congress, sometimes in the voting booth, but to work to make systemic change so that we end up with a system that is more equitable for us and for the next succeeding generations.